Elena Cruz's hands were shaking when she dialed the number she'd sworn she'd never use. Blood trickled from her split lip, and bruises were already forming dark circles around her wrists. The man she'd been living with for 2 years had finally shown his true face, and it was a monster's. She should have called 911. She should have called anyone else. But instead, with tears streaming down her face and terror clawing at her chest, she called her boss, the most dangerous man in the city. "Adriano," she whispered into the phone, her voice breaking. "Can you please come get me?" The line went silent for 3 seconds that felt like eternity. Then his voice came through, low and deadly calm. "I'm already on my way." If you want to see how far Elena's choice takes her and whether she survives the consequences, stay until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The city glittered below Adriano Vieri's penthouse office like scattered diamonds on black velvet, but he wasn't looking at the view. His attention was fixed on the stack of shipping manifests spread across his mahogany desk, each one representing millions in carefully orchestrated imports that kept his empire running like clockwork. Legal imports, mostly. The other kind. Well, those didn't appear on any manifest. His phone sat silent on the desk beside him, face up, as it always did. Adriano Vieri was a man who controlled chaos for a living, and that meant being accessible at all hours to the right people. At 38, he'd built an empire that most men only dreamed of, and he'd done it by understanding one fundamental truth. Power wasn't about what you had. It was about what you could take away. The phone lit up. The number that flashed across the screen made him pause. Elena Cruz, his executive assistant for the past 4 years. Professional, efficient, almost invisible in the way she moved through his world. She'd never called him outside of business hours. Not once. He answered on the second ring. "Elena." The sound that came through the speaker made every muscle in his body go rigid. It wasn't words, not at first. It was a sob, broken and desperate, followed by a gasp that told him she was trying to stop crying and failing. "Adriano." Her voice was barely a whisper, thick with tears and something else. Fear. Raw, primal fear. "Can you please come get me?" He was already standing, already grabbing his keys. "Where are you?" "Home. I'm at home." "Victor..." Another sob cut through her words. Adriano's jaw tightened. Victor Hale. The boyfriend. He'd met him exactly twice, once when Victor had shown up at the office unannounced, all swagger and expensive cologne, clearly marking his territory. The second time at the company holiday party, where Adriano had watched the way Victor's hand rested possessively on Elena's lower back, the way his fingers dug in just a little too hard when she tried to step away. "Lock yourself in the bathroom," Adriano said, his voice deadly calm, even as fury ignited in his chest. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. "He's gone," Elena whispered. "He left after... She couldn't finish. 15 minutes, Adriano repeated. "Don't open the door for anyone but me." He was out the door before the call ended, his driver already pulling the car around. Adriano settled into the back seat, his mind working through scenarios with the cold precision that had kept him alive in a business where mistakes were fatal. Elena Cruz was 28 years old, brilliant with numbers, and had a talent for organization that bordered on supernatural. In 4 years, she'd never been late, never made a significant error, never asked for anything beyond her salary and benefits. She kept his legitimate business running smoothly while he handled the aspects that would never appear on a balance sheet. She was also, he'd noticed despite his best efforts not to, stunningly beautiful in a way that she seemed determined to hide. Dark hair always pulled back in a severe bun, minimal makeup, conservative suits in gray and navy. But sometimes when she leaned over his desk to point out a discrepancy in a report, he'd catch a hint of jasmine perfume, see the graceful curve of her neck, notice the intelligence sparking in those dark eyes. He'd kept those observations locked down tight. Elena was off limits. She worked for him, and Adriano had rules. Rules kept things clean, kept complications at bay. He didn't mix business with pleasure, and he sure as hell didn't pursue women who were already in relationships, no matter how wrong those relationships looked from the outside. But all of that went out the window the moment he heard that sob. The city blurred past the tinted windows as his driver navigated traffic with efficient aggression. 12 minutes later, they pulled up in front of a modest apartment building in a neighborhood that was safe enough but hardly luxurious. Adriano was out of the car before it fully stopped. Elena's apartment was on the third floor. He took the stairs two at a time, his expensive leather shoes silent on the worn carpet. When he reached her door, he knocked twice, firm but not aggressive. "Elena, it's Adriano." The lock clicked almost immediately, and then the door opened just wide enough for her to look out. What he saw made that cold fury in his chest crystallize into something sharper, more dangerous. Her left eye was swelling shut, the skin around it already turning purple. Her lower lip was split, dried blood crusting at the corner of her mouth. But it was her wrists that made his hands curl into fists, dark bruises in the unmistakable shape of fingers, as if someone had grabbed her and squeezed hard enough to leave marks that would last for days. "May I come in?" His voice was carefully controlled, giving her the choice. Elena nodded and stepped back, opening the door fully. Adriano entered, his trained eye taking in everything at once. The living room looked normal, neat actually, with books organized on shelves and a laptop closed on the coffee table. But there were signs if you knew how to look. A lamp knocked over in the corner. A picture frame face down on the side table. And on the hardwood floor near the kitchen, a small spray of blood droplets. Elena stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, still wearing the blouse and slacks she'd had on at work. The blouse had a tear in the sleeve. She was barefoot, and he noticed broken glass swept into a pile near the kitchen entrance. "Tell me what happened," Adriano said quietly. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked away. Her whole body was shaking. I can't." "Then don't. Not yet." He pulled out his phone. "But I'm calling someone to look at those injuries." "No hospitals," Elena said quickly, panic flashing across her bruised face. "Please. No hospitals, no police. I can't. Victor will what?" The question came out harder than he intended. Elena flinched, and Adriano immediately softened his stance, raising his hand slightly in a gesture of peace. This wasn't about him. This wasn't about his rage at seeing someone who worked for him, hurt like this. This was about her and what she needed. "I have a private doctor," he said calmly. Discreet. He asked no questions and files no reports. "But those injuries need to be looked at, Elena. And then, when you're ready, you're going to tell me everything, and we're going to fix this." "You can't fix this." Her voice broke on the words. "You don't understand. Victor, I understand more than you think." Adriano made the call, speaking in low tones to his personal physician, a man who'd patched up more than one injury that couldn't be explained to emergency room staff. Then he turned his attention back to Elena. "Dr. Morrison will be here in 20 minutes. Until then, why don't you sit down? When's the last time you ate?" She stared at him as if he'd asked her to solve a complex equation. I don't remember." That told him everything. Adriano moved into the kitchen, carefully stepping around the broken glass. The refrigerator held the usual contents of someone who worked long hours: yogurt, some wilted salad greens, condiments, and not much else. He found bread in the pantry and made toast, spreading it with the butter he found in the fridge door. When he returned to the living room, Elena hadn't moved. She stood frozen in the same spot, staring at nothing, her arms still wrapped protectively around her torso. "Elena." He kept his voice gentle. "Come sit down." This time she obeyed, moving to the couch with mechanical precision. Adriano set the plate of toast on the coffee table in front of her and settled into the armchair across from her, maintaining distance, giving her space. "You don't have to eat it," he said, "but it's there if you want it." She picked up a piece with trembling hands and took a small bite. Then another. She ate both slices in silence while Adriano waited, his mind already working through the logistics of what needed to happen next. When she finished, she finally looked at him directly. "Why did you come?" "You called me." "But why did you come?" She repeated the question with more force. "I'm just your assistant. You could have sent someone else, or told me to call the police, or—" "You're not just anything, Elena." The words came out rougher than he intended. He took a breath, regained control. "In 4 years, you've never asked me for anything. Not a favor, not a raise beyond what you earned, not even a day off unless you were genuinely sick. So when you called me, terrified, in the middle of the night, there was exactly zero chance I was sending someone else. Tears welled up in her eyes again. I shouldn't have called you. I should have handled this myself. I should have... Where is he now, Victor? Elena's hands clenched in her lap. I don't know. He left after he... She gestured vaguely at her face. He was shouting about how I embarrassed him, how I never appreciate anything he does, how I'm lucky to have him because no one else would put up with me. And then he just snapped. He grabbed my wrists and shook me, and when I tried to pull away, he hit me. And then he did it again. And again. Adriano's jaw worked, but he kept his expression neutral. And then he stopped. Just stopped. Elena's voice went hollow. He looked at what he'd done, and I thought maybe he'd apologize, maybe he'd realize, but he didn't. He just grabbed his jacket and left, told me to clean myself up because I looked pathetic. The cold fury that had been simmering in Adriano's chest since he took her call solidified into something absolute. He'd built his empire on the edges of the law, had done things that kept him awake some nights. But he had rules. Lines he didn't cross. And putting hands on a woman, hurting someone smaller, weaker, someone who trusted you, that was so far over every line he had that there wasn't even a word for it. How long has this been going on? He asked the question even though he suspected he knew the answer. Elena's silence was confirmation enough. Elena, 2 years. The confession came out barely above a whisper. We've been together for 2 years. It started about 6 months in. Small things at first. Comments about what I wore, who I talked to, how I spent my time. Then it got worse. He'd go through my phone, show up at the office unexpectedly to check on me. And the yelling, that started about a year ago. But tonight was the first time he ever actually hit me. That you'll admit to, Adriano said quietly. She looked away, and he had his answer. A knock at the door interrupted them. Adriano checked his watch. Dr. Morrison had made good time. He answered the door himself, exchanging brief words with the silver-haired physician who carried a traditional black medical bag and an expression that said he'd seen this scenario too many times before. Miss Cruz, Dr. Morrison said warmly, approaching Elena with the practiced ease of someone who knew how to handle trauma victims. I'm Dr. Morrison. Mr. Vieri asked me to take a look at you. Is that all right? Elena nodded, and for the next 30 minutes, Adriano stood by the window with his back to them, giving her privacy while the doctor examined her injuries. He could hear the soft murmur of questions, Elena's hesitant answers, the sound of medical supplies being opened and used. When it was done, Dr. Morrison approached him at the window. Bruised ribs, mild concussion, various contusions, the doctor said in low tones. Nothing broken, but she's going to be in pain for a while. I've given her something for that and instructions for care. The injuries are consistent with... I know what they're consistent with, Adriano cut him off. Dr. Morrison nodded. She needs rest, ice for the swelling, and someone should check on her every few hours for the next 24 hours because of the concussion. I don't recommend she stay alone tonight. She won't be, Adriano said with finality. After Doctor Morrison left, Adriano turned back to find Elena still sitting on the couch, looking smaller somehow, more fragile. The medication was clearly starting to work. Some of the tension had left her shoulders, though the wariness in her eyes remained. Pack a bag, Adriano said gently. Enough for a few days. You're staying at my place. What? No, I can't. It's not negotiable, Elena. He softened his tone. You have a concussion. Someone needs to monitor you. And unless you want me sleeping on this couch for the next few days, you're coming with me where there's space and security. Victor has a key, she said suddenly, her eyes widening. He has a key to this apartment. If he comes back, then it's even more important that you're not here. Adriano was already pulling out his phone again. I'm having the locks changed tomorrow. Tonight, you're somewhere safe. But your penthouse isn't safe, Elena protested, but there was no real fight in her voice. It's you. You're my boss. People will talk. They'll think. Let them think whatever they want. Adriano crouched down so he was at eye level with her. Elena, listen to me. Right now, the only thing that matters is keeping you safe and giving you time to figure out what you want to do next. Everything else, work, Appearances, what people might say, none of that matters. Do you understand? She stared at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it, he saw something else. A spark of the competent, intelligent woman he'd worked with for 4 years. The woman who could juggle 15 projects at once and never drop a single ball. Okay, she whispered. Okay. She moved slowly, obviously in pain despite the medication, gathering clothes from her bedroom and toiletries from the bathroom. Adriano waited, giving her space but staying close enough that she knew he was there. When she emerged with a small suitcase, he took it from her without a word and guided her out of the apartment. The drive back to his penthouse was silent. Elena stared out the window at the passing city lights, and Adriano watched her reflection in the glass. He was already making mental lists of what needed to happen. The locks changed, obviously, but also security for her apartment building, just in case Victor decided to make another appearance. Background check on Victor Hale. Deep, thorough, the kind that uncovered every secret and every lie. And depending on what that background check revealed, Adriano had resources that most people didn't. Connections that ran deep into both the legitimate world and the shadows. If Victor Hale thought he could hurt Elena without consequences, the man was about to receive a very harsh education. They arrived at his building, and Adriano's doorman, a former boxer named Marcus, who'd been with him for 5 years, took one look at Elena's face and had the good sense to say nothing beyond a respectful, "Good evening, Mr. Vieri, Miss Cruz." The elevator ride to the penthouse was smooth and silent. When the doors opened directly into his foyer, Elena stepped out hesitantly, as if entering foreign territory, which, in a way, she was. She'd been to his home office a handful of times to drop off urgent documents, but never beyond that front room. "Guest suite is this way," Adriano said, leading her down the hallway past his office and the main living areas. He opened the door to a spacious bedroom with an attached bathroom, decorated in soft neutrals that somehow felt warm despite the obvious expense. "Bathroom's through there. Everything you should need is already stocked, but if you need anything else, just let me know. I'll be in the master suite at the end of the hall if you need anything during the night." Elena set her suitcase down and turned to face him. In the soft lighting of the bedroom, the bruises on her face looked even worse, but her eyes were clear, focused. "Adriano, I don't know how to thank you for—" "Don't." He held up a hand. "You don't need to thank me, Elena. Just rest. We'll figure out everything else tomorrow." But she shook her head. "No, I need to say this. I need you to know that I didn't want to call you. I sat there on my bathroom floor for almost an hour, trying to think of anyone else I could reach out to. But the truth is, there isn't anyone else. Victor made sure of that. Every friend I had, every connection, he found reasons why they were bad for me, why I shouldn't trust them, why they were trying to come between us. And eventually, it was just easier to let them go than to fight about it. So tonight, when I needed help, the only person I could think of who might actually come was you. Because in 4 years, you've been the one constant thing in my life that Victor couldn't take away. The one place that was mine." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to address. Adriano felt something shift in his chest, some carefully maintained wall developing the first hairline crack. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "I'll have Mrs. Chen bring up breakfast in the morning. She's my housekeeper, comes in daily. I'll let her know you're here so you don't get surprised." Elena nodded, exhaustion finally showing in the slump of her shoulders. "Good night, Adriano, and thank you, even if you don't want to hear it." He left before he could do something stupid like reach for her, offering comfort that might cross lines that shouldn't be crossed. Not now. Not when she was vulnerable and hurt, and probably not thinking clearly. Back in his own room, Adriano poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Victor Hale was going about his night, probably thinking he'd successfully put Elena back in her place, reasserted his dominance, reminded her why she needed him. The man had no idea what was coming. Adriano pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Marco, his head of security. "Need a complete background on Victor Hale. Everything. Financial, criminal, employment, associates, all of it. Have it on my desk by noon tomorrow." The response came back in seconds. "On it, boss." Then Adriano made one more call, this one to his attorney, a shark in Armani who specialized in cases that required both legal expertise and absolute discretion. "Richard," Adriano said when the man answered, "I need you to clear your morning schedule. I have a client who's going to need your services." "What kind of case are we talking about?" Richard Chen asked, all business despite the late hour. "Domestic violence, possibly financial abuse. I won't know until I see the background check. The victim is—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Someone important to me. I want every option laid out. Restraining orders, criminal charges, civil suit, everything." "Understood. Have her come to my office at 10 tomorrow. I'll handle the initial consultation personally." After he hung up, Adriano finished his scotch and tried to sleep, but his mind kept circling back to the image of Elena's bruised face, her split lip, those finger-shaped marks on her wrists. 4 years he'd worked with her. 4 years of professional boundaries and careful distance. And in one phone call, all of that had dissolved, because the truth he was finally admitting to himself, standing alone in the dark at 3 in the morning, was that Elena Cruz had never been just his assistant. She'd been a presence that made his days better, a voice that he found himself listening for, a person whose quiet competence and hidden strength had impressed him more than he'd ever let himself acknowledge. And now someone had hurt her, had broken that careful composure she wore like armor, had made her afraid in her own home. Adriano Vieri was many things: businessman, strategist, someone who operated in the gray areas between legal and not. But he was also a man who protected what was his. And somewhere over the past 4 years, without quite realizing it, he'd started thinking of Elena as his. Not in the possessive, controlling way that Victor Hale clearly saw her, but in the way that mattered more, the way that meant her safety, her happiness, her well-being had become important to him. Important enough that he'd dropped everything to get to her. Important enough that he was already planning Victor Hale's systematic destruction. Down the hall, in the guest suite, Elena lay in the most comfortable bed she'd ever been in, staring at the ceiling and wondering what the hell she'd just done. She'd crossed a line tonight, called her boss, asked him to rescue her, agreed to stay in his home. Every rational thought in her head said this was a mistake, that she was just trading one complicated situation for another, that mixing her personal disaster with her professional life was a recipe for even more chaos. But Adriano had come, without hesitation, without judgment, without demands. He'd simply come, and he'd been gentle, and he'd made her feel safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. The medication was pulling her under, making her thoughts fuzzy, but one thing remained crystal clear. Tomorrow, she would have to start making real decisions. About Victor, about her life, about what happened next. But tonight, just for tonight, she was safe, and that was enough. In the morning, everything would change, but neither of them knew just how much. They didn't know that the background check would reveal secrets far worse than simple violence. They didn't know that Victor Hale's sins went deeper than they imagined. And they definitely didn't know that the protection Adriano offered tonight would become something neither of them could walk away from. But they would find out. Soon enough, they would find out everything. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Elena woke to unfamiliar softness, sheets that felt like water, pillows that cradled her head without pressure, and silence. Complete, unbroken silence. No traffic noise filtering through thin walls, no neighbors arguing through shared vents, no anxiety coiled in her stomach waiting for the sound of a key in the lock. For one blissful moment, she forgot everything. Then she moved, and pain shot through her ribs like lightning. Her eye throbbed, her wrists ached, and memory came flooding back in a wave that made her stomach turn. Victor. The fight. The way his hand had felt connecting with her face. The sound of her own voice calling Adriano, broken and desperate. She sat up slowly, taking inventory of the damage in the gray morning light. Someone, Mrs. Chen probably, had left a bottle of water and pain medication on the nightstand along with a handwritten note. "Take 2 with food. Breakfast will be ready when you are." Elena reached for the pills, then stopped. She needed to think clearly today, and painkillers would make everything fuzzy. Instead, she forced herself out of bed and into the attached bathroom, where she finally got a good look at herself in the mirror. The face staring back barely looked like hers. Her left eye was swollen nearly shut, the bruising a spectacular array of purple and black that spread across her cheekbone. Her lip was split and crusty with dried blood. The marks on her wrist had darkened overnight into perfect impressions of Victor's fingers. Evidence. That's what Dr. Morrison had called them. Evidence of assault. Evidence that could be documented, photographed, used in court if she wanted to press charges. If she wanted to. The question sat heavy in her chest as she showered carefully, avoiding the worst of the bruises. What did she want? 24 hours ago, she'd still been trying to convince herself that Victor loved her, that his jealousy was just passion, that if she could just be better, quieter, more understanding, less threatening, everything would be fine. But standing in Adriano Vieri's guest bathroom, wrapped in a towel that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, Elena felt something shifting inside her, something that felt dangerously like anger. She dressed in the most conservative clothes she'd packed, black pants and a gray sweater that covered the worst of the bruising, and braided her wet hair to keep it off her face. The mirror showed her a woman who looked like she'd been in a car accident, but at least she was standing. At least she was here and not back in that apartment, waiting for Victor to come back and apologize with flowers and promises that would last exactly until the next time. The smell of coffee led her through the penthouse to a kitchen that looked like something from an architecture magazine, all gleaming stainless steel and white marble, with windows that offered a view of the city waking up below. A woman in her 60s stood at the stove, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, humming softly to herself. "Miss Cruz," she said warmly, turning with a smile that faltered only slightly when she saw Elena's face. "I'm Mrs. Chen. Please, sit down. I've made breakfast." Elena slid onto one of the bar stools at the kitchen island, feeling awkward and out of place. "You didn't have to." "Of course I did." Mrs. Chen set a plate in front of her. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit arranged beautifully. "Mr. Vieri was very specific. You're to eat, rest, and not worry about anything today." "Where is he?" "In his office. He's been up since 5. Mrs. Chen poured coffee into a delicate china cup. "He asked me to let him know when you were awake, but there's no rush. Eat first." The food was perfect. The eggs soft and buttery, the toast crisp, the fruit sweet. Elena ate mechanically, not really tasting any of it, her mind already racing ahead to what came next. She couldn't hide here forever. Eventually, she'd have to face the real world again. Face Victor. Face the mess her life had become. She was finishing the last of her coffee when Adriano appeared in the doorway. He'd changed from last night's clothes into dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Even dressed casually, he radiated the kind of power that made people instinctively straighten their spines. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his dark eyes scanning her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Like I lost a fight," Elena said, aiming for lightness and missing. "You didn't lose." Adriano moved into the kitchen, pouring himself coffee. "You survived." "There's a difference." Mrs. Chen excused herself quietly, leaving them alone. The silence stretched out, comfortable despite everything, until Adriano finally spoke. "I have someone I want you to meet. My attorney. He specializes in cases like yours." "Cases like mine," Elena repeated, the words tasting bitter. "You mean women who let their boyfriends beat them?" "I mean victims of domestic violence who deserve legal protection and justice." Adriano's voice was firm. "Richard Chen is the best there is. He'll lay out your options. Restraining order, criminal charges, civil suit, whatever you want to pursue. And if I don't want to pursue anything, then that's your choice." He set his coffee down and looked at her directly. "Elena, I'm not going to force you to do anything, but I'm going to make sure you have all the information you need to make an informed decision. Can you give me that much?" She nodded slowly. "When?" 11 o'clock. His office is downtown. I'll drive you." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Something flickered across his expression, too fast to read. "I want to, unless you'd rather go alone." The truth was, she didn't want to be alone. Didn't want to face lawyers and legal questions and the reality of what had happened without someone in her corner. And Adriano? He made her feel safe in a way she couldn't quite explain. "I'd appreciate the company," she admitted quietly. He nodded, satisfied. "There's something else. The background check on Victor came in this morning." Elena's stomach dropped. "Background check?" "I had my security team run a full workup. Financial records, employment history, criminal background, known associates. Adriano's expression darkened. You need to see this. He pulled out his phone and brought up a document, sliding it across the counter to her. Elena picked it up with shaking hands and started reading. The first page was standard enough. Victor's employment history at a mid-level marketing firm, his previous address in another state, his education credentials. But as she scrolled down, the information got progressively worse. 2 previous restraining orders filed by ex-girlfriends, 1 arrest for assault that had been pleaded down to disorderly conduct, a bankruptcy from 3 years ago, and then, buried in the financial section, something that made her blood run cold. He's been using my credit, she whispered, staring at the screen. These cards, I didn't open these accounts. Keep reading, Adriano said grimly. She did. Credit cards in her name that she'd never applied for, maxed out to their limits. A car loan she knew nothing about. Even a small business line of credit that showed a balance of over $30,000. All of it in her name. All of it destroying her credit score and burying her in debt she didn't even know existed. How is this possible? Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped the phone. I never authorized any of this. I never even saw these documents. Identity theft. He had access to your personal information, social security number, birth date, address, probably copied your driver's license at some point. It's not hard to do if you know what you're doing and don't care about the consequences. Adriano's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Elena set the phone down carefully, afraid she might throw it otherwise. 2 years. For 2 years, Victor had been systematically destroying her financial future, and she'd had no idea. No wonder he'd been so insistent about managing their finances, so angry when she'd suggested opening a separate bank account, so controlling about every dollar she spent. I want to destroy him, she said, the words coming out flat and cold. I want to take everything he did and shove it down his throat until he chokes on it. For the first time since she'd met him, Adriano Vieri smiled, really smiled, and it was terrifying. Good, that's exactly the attitude Richard needs to hear. Get your things, we leave in 30 minutes. The law offices of Chen and Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming tower in the financial district. Everything about the place screamed money and power, from the receptionist's designer suit to the modern art on the walls to the view that stretched out over the city like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. Richard Chen himself was a trim man in his early 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. He greeted Adriano with the familiarity of an old friend, and Elena with the gentle professionalism of someone who'd seen too many victims and learned how to handle them without making them feel fragile. Miss Cruz, he said, gesturing to a chair in his expansive office. Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy. Elena sat, hyper-aware of Adriano settling into the chair beside her. Richard moved behind his desk, pulling out a legal pad and pen with practiced efficiency. Let me start by explaining what we can do, Richard began. Based on what Adriano has told me and the documentation from Dr. Morrison, you have grounds for several legal actions. First, an emergency restraining order. We can file today and have it granted within 48 hours. This would legally prohibit Victor Hale from contacting you, coming within 500 feet of you, or entering your residence. He has a key to my apartment, Elena said quietly. We'll have that addressed as part of the order. He'll be required to surrender it. Richard made a note. Second option, criminal charges. Assault and battery, at minimum. The photographic evidence Dr. Morrison provided is substantial, and with your testimony, we have a strong case. This would mean working with the district attorney's office and potentially testifying in court. Elena's stomach churned. And if I press charges? Victor would be arrested, arraigned, and either released on bail with conditions or held pending trial depending on the judge's assessment of flight risk and danger to you. The case would likely take several months to work through the system. He'll be furious, Elena whispered. If I have him arrested, he'll be legally prohibited from retaliating, Richard interrupted gently. And if he violates those terms, he'll face additional charges and likely jail time. I won't lie to you, Miss Cruz. Pressing charges is difficult. It means reliving what happened, potentially multiple times, but it also means holding him accountable. Adriano leaned forward slightly. Tell her about the financial fraud. Richard nodded. That's the third component. The identity theft and fraud are separate criminal matters, and they're also civil issues. We can file a police report for the identity theft, work with the credit bureaus to flag the fraudulent accounts, and pursue civil action to recover damages. This is actually more clear-cut than the assault case because the paper trail is extensive. He left a lot of evidence. How much? Elena asked. How much debt did he put in my name? Richard consulted his notes. Based on the preliminary financial records, approximately $73,000 across multiple accounts and loans. The number hit her like a physical blow. $73,000. Money she didn't have, debt she couldn't pay, a financial hole so deep she couldn't see the bottom. I can't, she struggled to breathe. I can't afford to pay that back. I don't have that kind of money. This will ruin me. I'll never be able to buy a house, get a decent car, maybe even keep my job if they run a credit check. Elena. Adriano's hand closed over hers, warm and steady. Breathe. You're not responsible for debt incurred through fraud. Richard can get this sorted out. He's right, Richard confirmed. It will take time and documentation, but we can get these accounts removed from your credit report. You'll need to file affidavits of fraud with each creditor, possibly work with the police on the criminal investigation, but you won't be held liable for the debt. Not once we prove it was identity theft. Lena focused on breathing, on the solid warmth of Adriano's hand covering hers, on the fact that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't completely hopeless. What do you recommend? She asked Richard finally. If I were your daughter, what would you tell me to do? Richard set down his pen and looked at her directly. I'd tell you to file for the restraining order today. Document everything. Pursue the criminal charges for assault and the fraud. Make it clear that this behavior has consequences. But more importantly, I'd tell you that this isn't your fault. None of it. Not the violence, not the financial abuse, not the fact that it took this long to ask for help. You survived, Miss Cruz. Now let's make sure he doesn't get the chance to do this to you, or anyone else, again. The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, broke something loose in Elena's chest. She felt tears starting and tried to blink them back, but they came anyway, sliding hot down her bruised cheeks. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm sorry, I just... Don't apologize. Richard pushed a box of tissues across the desk. You've been through trauma. Tears are normal. Take your time. Adriano's hand tightened on hers, and when she glanced at him, she saw something fierce in his expression, something protective and angry and determined all at once. Do it, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. File the restraining order. File the criminal charges. All of it. I want everything documented. I want him to face what he's done. Richard smiled. That's what I needed to hear. I'll start the paperwork immediately. I'll need a detailed statement from you about the assault. Dates, times, what was said, what happened. Can you do that today? Elena nodded. Yes. Good. Adriano, give us the room. Adriano stood, but he hesitated, looking down at Elena. You sure you're okay? She met his eyes and found something there that made her chest tighten. Concern, yes, but also respect. He was looking at her like she was strong, capable, worthy of protection, not because she was weak, but because she mattered. I'm sure, she said. Thank you for everything. He nodded once and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Richard pulled out a fresh legal pad and uncapped his pen. All right, Miss Cruz, let's start from the beginning. When did you and Victor Hale begin your relationship? For the next 2 hours, Elena talked. She told Richard everything, the whirlwind early romance, the gradual isolation from friends and family, the way Victor had slowly taken control of every aspect of her life. The first time he'd yelled at her for talking too long to a male colleague. The first time he'd gone through her phone. The first time he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks. Then apologized so profusely she'd convinced herself it was an accident. She told him about the night before, the argument that had started over nothing, the way Victor's rage had escalated so fast she'd barely had time to register what was happening, the feeling of his hand connecting with her face, the taste of blood in her mouth, the terror of realizing that the man she'd trusted was capable of hurting her and not stopping. Richard took notes, asked clarifying questions, and never once made her feel like she was to blame. When she finally finished, exhausted and wrung out, he set down his pen and looked at her with something like admiration. You're incredibly brave, Miss Cruz. Many victims never make it this far. I don't feel brave, Elena admitted. I feel stupid for not seeing it sooner, for not leaving before it got this bad. Abuse is designed to be invisible until it's not, Richard said quietly. Abusers are experts at manipulation. They isolate you, undermine your confidence, make you doubt your own perception of reality. By the time you realize what's happening, they've already convinced you that you can't survive without them. The fact that you got out, that you called for help, that you're here right now choosing to fight back, that takes more courage than you realize. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to feel like she'd done something right instead of just making a series of terrible mistakes. But the doubt was still there, whispering that maybe if she'd been stronger, smarter, better, none of this would have happened. What happens now? She asked. Now I file the emergency restraining order. That'll be processed within 24 to 48 hours. I'll also contact the district attorney's office and the police to get the criminal investigation started. For the financial fraud, we'll begin the process of filing affidavits and police reports. It's going to be a lot of paperwork, a lot of documentation, but we'll get through it step by step. And Victor? Will be served with the restraining order by the police. He'll be informed of the criminal charges. And he'll very quickly realize that you're not coming back, that this isn't something he can smooth over with apologies and flowers. Richard's expression hardened. Men like Victor Hale rely on their victims being too scared or too broken to fight back. The moment you stand up and say no more, their power disappears. Elena nodded, trying to absorb everything. It felt surreal, like she was living someone else's life. 24 hours ago, she'd been a woman trapped in an abusive relationship with no clear way out. Now she was sitting in a lawyer's office, filing charges, taking control of her own narrative. There's one more thing we should discuss, Richard said, his tone shifting slightly. Safety. Once Victor is served with the restraining order and learns about the criminal charges, he may react unpredictably. I strongly recommend you stay somewhere he can't find you. Adriano mentioned you're currently at his residence? Yes, but I can't stay there indefinitely. I have to go back to work eventually, back to my apartment. Your apartment isn't safe, not yet. We're having the locks changed, but that's just one layer of security. I'd recommend you stay with Adriano at least until we see how Victor responds to the legal action. The idea of continuing to live in Adriano's penthouse, of being that close to him day after day, made something flutter nervously in Elena's stomach. It was one thing to accept emergency shelter for a night. It was another thing entirely to move in, even temporarily. I'll talk to him, she said finally. When she emerged from Richard's office, she found Adriano in the waiting area, scrolling through his phone. He stood immediately when he saw her. How'd it go? He's filing everything. Restraining order, criminal charges, fraud investigation, all of it. Elena felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. Richard thinks I should stay with you until we see how Victor reacts to being served. Then that's what you'll do. Adriano said it like it was already decided. No room for argument. Adriano, I can't just move into your home. You're not moving in. You're staying there temporarily for your own safety. There's a difference. He guided her toward the elevator with a hand on the small of her back. Besides, I have plenty of space. Mrs. Chen is already planning meals for two, and it'll be easier for both of us if you're somewhere I know you're protected. What about work? Elena asked as they stepped into the elevator. I've already missed today. You're on medical leave, paid, doctor's orders. Adriano pressed the button for the garage. When you're ready to come back, we'll reassess. But right now, your priority is healing and getting through the legal process, not worrying about quarterly reports. She should have argued, should have insisted on maintaining some independence, some sense of normalcy. But the truth was, she was exhausted, wrung out from 2 hours of reliving trauma, terrified of what came next, and desperately grateful that someone was willing to take care of the details while she figured out how to put herself back together. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. The drive back to the penthouse was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But when they arrived and Adriano walked her inside, he paused in the foyer. I have meetings this afternoon that I can't reschedule, he said, but Mrs. Chen will be here if you need anything. And Elena, you did good today, making those decisions, standing up for yourself. That took strength. She looked up at him, this powerful, dangerous man who'd dropped everything to help her, and felt something shift in her chest, something warm and terrifying and completely inappropriate given the circumstances. I couldn't have done it without you, she admitted. Yes, you could have. His dark eyes held hers. You're stronger than you think. You just needed someone to remind you of that. Then he was gone, heading to his office, leaving Elena standing in the foyer of his penthouse, wondering how everything in her life had changed so drastically in such a short time. The afternoon stretched out long and quiet. Mrs. Chen brought her lunch, then discreetly disappeared. Elena tried to rest but couldn't settle, her mind racing through everything Richard had told her, everything that was about to happen. Finally, she gave up and wandered into Adriano's home office, the one room she was familiar with from occasional document deliveries. It looked the same as always. Massive desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, windows overlooking the city. But sitting at that desk now, in the place where she'd worked for 4 years maintaining professional distance, felt different, intimate in a way that made her uncomfortable. She was about to leave when she noticed a folder on the desk, labeled with her name. Inside was the full background check on Victor, all 30 pages of it. Elena sat down and started reading, really reading this time, absorbing every detail. The ex-girlfriends who'd filed restraining orders, the pattern of escalating violence, the financial fraud that went back years before he'd even met her. Victor Hale wasn't just an abuser. He was a predator with a methodology, a man who targeted vulnerable women and systematically destroyed them. And she'd loved him, had believed his lies, his promises, his accusations that she was the problem. The realization made her feel sick and angry and humiliated all at once. She was still sitting there when Adriano returned hours later, finding her hunched over the file with tears streaming down her face. Elena. He was across the room in seconds, pulling her up from the chair. What happened? What's wrong? I was so stupid, she choked out. It's all here. Everything he did to other women, the pattern, the signs I should have seen. How did I not see it? How did I let him... Stop. Adriano's hands framed her face, forcing her to look at him. This is not your fault, none of it. You hear me? Victor Hale is a skilled manipulator who's been doing this for years. You didn't let him do anything. He targeted you, deceived you, and abused you. That's on him, not you. But I should have what? Read his mind? Predicted the future? Elena, you did the best you could with the information you had. And when you finally saw the truth, you got out. You asked for help. You're fighting back. That's what matters. She wanted to believe him, wanted to let go of the guilt and shame that had been building since she started reading that file. But it was hard, so hard, to accept that she'd been a victim and not just a fool. Adriano must have seen something in her face because his expression softened. Come here. He pulled her into his arms, and Elena went, too exhausted and emotionally raw to maintain any distance. She pressed her face against his chest and let herself cry, really cry, for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Adriano held her through it, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring things in Italian that she didn't understand but somehow found comforting anyway. When the tears finally stopped, she pulled back embarrassed. I'm sorry, I got your shirt all wet. I have other shirts. His thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away the last of the tears. Better? A little. She managed a shaky smile. You're being very patient with me. You're worth being patient with. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Elena stepped back, putting necessary space between them. Richard called while I was in meetings, Adriano said, letting her retreat. The restraining order is being filed tomorrow morning. Victor should be served by tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow. Less than 24 hours until Victor learned that she wasn't coming back, that she was pressing charges, that his entire world was about to come crashing down. The thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. What if he comes here? She asked quietly. What if he figures out where I am? He won't get past building security, and even if he somehow did, he'd have to get through me first. The absolute certainty in Adriano's voice should have sounded arrogant. Instead, it just sounded true. You're safe here, Elena. I promise you that. She believed him, which was either the smartest thing she'd ever done or the most dangerous. Time would tell which. The courthouse steps were marble, worn smooth by decades of footsteps. People seeking justice, people fleeing it, people who'd discovered that truth was sometimes a weapon sharper than any lie. Elena stood at the bottom, her hand gripping the iron railing so hard her knuckles had gone white. "You don't have to do this," Adriano said quietly beside her. "Richard can handle the testimony. The evidence speaks for itself." Elena shook her head, her dark hair catching the morning light. 3 months had passed since that night she'd called him. 3 months since her world had cracked open and revealed all the rot beneath. The bruises had faded, but what they'd uncovered had only grown darker, deeper, more devastating with each document Richard Chen's team had unearthed. "Yes, I do," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I need to look him in the eye and tell the truth. All of it." Adriano studied her face, and something shifted in his expression. Pride, maybe, or recognition. The frightened woman who'd hidden in her apartment had transformed into someone stronger, sharper, someone who'd taken all that pain and forged it into purpose. "Then let's go," he said, offering his arm. She took it, drawing strength from the solid presence beside her. They climbed the steps together, past reporters who shouted questions that neither of them answered, past curious onlookers drawn by the spectacle of a high-profile case, past all the noise and chaos until they reached the quiet intensity of the courtroom itself. Victor was already there, seated at the defendant's table with his attorney, a nervous-looking man named Patterson who'd clearly realized he was in over his head. When Victor's eyes found Elena, his expression twisted into something ugly, possessive. He started to rise, but his attorney grabbed his arm, hissing something urgent that made him sink back down. Elena felt Adriano tense beside her, a predator recognizing a threat. His hand moved to the small of her back, a gesture that was protective without being possessive, grounding without being controlling. The difference between that touch and the way Victor used to grab her was everything. Richard Chen met them at the prosecution table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit immaculate. "The judge will call us to order in 5 minutes," he said, his voice low and professional. "Elena, remember what we discussed. Just answer the questions directly. Don't embellish, don't minimize. The evidence will corroborate everything you say." "I remember," Elena said. What she didn't say was that she'd spent the past week memorizing every detail of every document they'd found. Every forged signature, every drained account, every lie that Victor had built into a prison around her life. She'd studied it all with the same focus she brought to Adriano's business accounts. Except this time, the numbers represented her own destruction. The bailiff called the court to order and Judge Margaret Torres entered, a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen every variation of human weakness. She settled into her seat with the weight of authority and glanced at the docket. "The People versus Victor Hale," she announced. "Charges include assault and battery, identity theft, financial fraud, and forgery. How does the defendant plead?" Victor's attorney stood. "Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor." Judge Torres nodded as if she'd expected nothing else. "Proceed, Mr. Chen." Richard rose smoothly, and for the next hour, he methodically constructed a case that was both devastating and irrefutable. Bank statements showing Elena's accounts systematically drained, credit card applications bearing her signature, except forensic analysis proved they'd been forged, loan documents she'd never seen for purchases she'd never made. A web of financial destruction that had left her drowning in debt. She didn't know existed until Adriano's forensic accountant had started digging. "The prosecution calls Elena Cruz to the stand," Richard announced. Elena stood, her legs steadier than she'd expected. She walked to the witness box, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then she sat down and finally allowed herself to look directly at Victor. He was staring at her with an expression that mixed rage and disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend how his property had developed the audacity to fight back. That look had terrified her once. Now, it just made her angry. "Miss Cruz," Richard began gently, "can you tell the court how long you were in a relationship with the defendant?" 2 years, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "We started dating about 6 months after I began working for Vieri Imports." "And during those 2 years, did the defendant ever exhibit controlling behavior?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "That's like asking if water is wet." "Victor controlled everything, what I wore, who I talked to, where I went, how I spent my time. At first I thought he was just protective. I'd never had someone pay that much attention to me before. It felt like love." "When did you realize it wasn't?" "About 6 months in, When he went through my phone and deleted contacts he decided were inappropriate. When I objected, he told me that if I really loved him, I wouldn't need other people, that he should be enough. Elena's hands clenched in her lap. I believed him. I actually believed him. Richard moved closer to the witness box. Did the defendant ever access your financial accounts? All the time. He convinced me that since we were in a serious relationship, we should be transparent about money. So I gave him my account passwords, my credit card information, everything. He said it was about trust. She paused, swallowing hard. What I didn't know was that he was using that access to slowly destroy my credit and drain my savings. Objection, Patterson called out weakly. Speculation. The witness can't know the defendant's intent. Sustained, Judge Torres said. Stick to facts, Miss Cruz. Elena nodded. The facts are that over the course of 18 months, my savings account went from $8,000 to zero. Credit cards I never applied for appeared in my name, maxed out on purchases I never made. And when I started receiving collection notices, Victor convinced me that it was identity theft, that some stranger had stolen my information. He even helped me file police reports. Did you suspect him? Never. The word came out sharp with self-recrimination. I was so busy trying to keep up with my job, so stressed about the debt I thought was random bad luck, so focused on not making Victor angry, I never once considered that the person helping me file fraud reports was the one committing the fraud. Richard turned to face the jury. When did you discover the truth? 3 months ago, after Victor assaulted me and I left. Elena's voice remained steady even as she felt Victor's glare burning into her. Adriano Vieri, my employer, hired a forensic accountant to review my finances as part of building a case for a restraining order. That's when we found all of it. Every forged signature, every fraudulent account, every lie. Let's talk about that night, Richard said, his tone gentling. The night of the assault. Can you tell the court what happened? This was the part Elena had been dreading, the part that would require her to relive the worst night of her life in front of strangers. But she'd committed to this, to speaking truth even when it hurt, to refusing to hide anymore. I came home from work around 8, she began. Victor was already there. He'd been drinking, which wasn't unusual. He started accusing me of having an affair with my boss. It wasn't true, but he'd convinced himself of it. When I denied it, he got angrier. He grabbed my wrists and shook me, demanding I admit the truth. When I couldn't admit to something that wasn't happening, he hit me. Multiple times. Where did he hit you? Face, mostly. I have medical records from Dr. Morrison documenting the injuries: split lip, black eye, bruised ribs, concussion. Richard introduced the medical records into evidence, along with photographs that made several jury members wince. Elena watched them react and felt a grim satisfaction. Let them see. Let everyone see what Victor Hale really was beneath the charm. What happened after the assault? Richard asked. Victor left. Just walked out like nothing had happened, and I sat there, bleeding, trying to figure out what to do. I knew I should call the police, but I was terrified of what Victor would do if I did. So instead, she paused, her eyes finding Adriano in the gallery. He nodded once, encouraging. Instead, I called my boss and asked him to come get me. Why Mr. Vieri? Because in 4 years of working for him, he'd never once made me feel small or afraid. Because I knew he'd come, and he'd help me, and he wouldn't judge me for how I got into that situation. And I was right. He was there in 15 minutes. Patterson stood for cross-examination, tugging nervously at his tie. Miss Cruz, isn't it true that you and Mr. Vieri are now in a romantic relationship? Objection, Richard said sharply. Relevance? Your Honor, it goes to bias, Patterson argued. The witness's testimony is clearly influenced by her current relationship with Mr. Vieri, who has a vested interest in seeing my client convicted. Judge Torres considered this. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Patterson. Elena met Patterson's eyes directly. Adriano and I are not in a romantic relationship. He's my employer, and after the assault, he provided me with a safe place to stay while I recovered and figured out my next steps. That's all. But you're living in his penthouse, are you not? I was, for about 2 weeks, until I found a new apartment that Victor didn't have access to. Mr. Vieri changed the locks on my old place and hired security, but I didn't feel safe there anymore. Every room had memories I needed to escape. And Mr. Vieri paid for your new apartment? No. I paid for it with my salary, which I earned by doing my job well. What Mr. Vieri did was connect me with a real estate agent and ensure the building had adequate security. He also paid for the forensic accounting that uncovered all the fraud your client committed, yes. Because unlike some people, when Adriano sees someone in trouble, he helps them instead of exploiting them. Patterson flinched at the sharp edge in her voice. No further questions. Elena stepped down from the witness box on trembling legs. She'd done it. She'd told her story, faced Victor, refused to be ashamed of what had happened to her. Richard gave her a small nod of approval as she returned to her seat beside Adriano. You were magnificent, Adriano murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. The trial continued for 3 more days. Richard called witness after witness. The forensic accountant who'd tracked every fraudulent transaction, handwriting experts who confirmed the forged signatures, even Elena's former neighbor who testified to hearing violent arguments from her apartment. Victor's attorney tried to paint Elena as a scorned woman seeking revenge, but the evidence was simply too overwhelming. On the 4th day, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. We find the defendant guilty on all counts. The words fell like hammer strikes, final and absolute. Victor's face went white, then red, then twisted into pure fury. He lunged from his seat, shouting something incoherent, and it took 3 bailiffs to restrain him as he was dragged from the courtroom still screaming about betrayal and lies. Elena sat perfectly still, waiting to feel relief or triumph or something. Instead, she just felt tired. So incredibly tired. It's over, Richard said, gathering his papers. Sentencing is in 2 weeks, but with the evidence we presented, he's looking at significant prison time. Thank you, Elena said quietly. For everything. Thank Mr. Vieri. He's the one who hired me. Richard's eyes flicked to Adriano with something like respect. And he's the one who made it clear that failure wasn't an option. After the courtroom cleared, Elena no Pasalami and Adriano walked out into the late afternoon sun. The reporters were gone, having gotten their sound bites earlier. The steps were empty except for a few pigeons and the ever-present city noise. I need to go back to the office, Adriano said, checking his phone. But take the rest of the day. Hell, take the rest of the week if you need it. I need to work, Elena countered. I need normal. I've had enough drama to last a lifetime. Something flickered across Adriano's face. Disappointment, maybe, though it was gone too quickly to be sure. Elena, I know the trial is over, but you need to understand that Victor might not accept this. Men like him, they don't handle losing well. I want to keep the security detail on you for a while longer. You mean the 2 very large men who've been following me everywhere for the past 3 months? Elena's lips quirked into something almost like a smile. I noticed, Adriano. Kind of hard to miss. And yet you never complained. Because they made me feel safe. She looked up at him, this man who'd become something more than a boss, but less than, or maybe different from, whatever her heart wanted him to be. You've done so much for me already. The lawyers, the accountant, the security, letting me stay in your home when I needed somewhere safe. At some point, I need to figure out how to stand on my own again. Standing on your own doesn't mean refusing help when it's offered, Adriano said quietly. And it sure as hell doesn't mean taking unnecessary risks because you're trying to prove something. I'm not trying to prove anything. I just want my life back. You'll have it, but let's make sure you survive to enjoy it first. They stood there on the courthouse steps, the city moving around them, neither quite ready to walk away. The past 3 months had been strange, intense, a forced proximity that had revealed layers of both of them that Elena hadn't known existed. She'd seen Adriano at his most ruthless, watching him systematically dismantle Victor's lies with the same cold precision he brought to business negotiations. But she'd also seen him at his most gentle, bringing her tea when she couldn't sleep, sitting with her in comfortable silence when words were too much, respecting boundaries she hadn't even known she needed to set. And somewhere in all of that, something had shifted. Some recognition that the careful professional distance they'd maintained for 4 years had become something else entirely, something neither of them quite knew what to do with. Adriano, Elena began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the question that had been building in her chest for weeks. Why did you do all this? And don't say it's because I work for you, because we both know you could have just given me a referral to a lawyer and called it a day." He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like confession. "Because when you called me that night, something in me just broke. The idea of you hurt, scared, trapped, it was unacceptable. And once I started looking at what he'd done to you, I couldn't stop. Every new piece of evidence we found made me angrier, made me more determined to burn his whole world down." "That's not an answer. That's just telling me what you did, not why." "I know." He smiled, a rare genuine expression that transformed his usually controlled features. "I'm still figuring that out myself." Before Elena could respond, Adriano's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. "I need to take this." Marco wouldn't call unless it was urgent. He stepped away, his voice dropping into the clipped tones he used for security matters. Elena couldn't hear the specifics, but she saw his body language change, shoulders tensing, jaw tightening, that dangerous stillness that meant someone had just made a very serious mistake. When he returned, his face was grim. "Victor made bail." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "What? How?" "Richard said with the flight risk assessment, someone posted it. We're trying to find out who, but right now, Victor Hale is a free man until sentencing." Adriano's hand found her elbow, steadying. "Which means the security detail isn't optional anymore. I'm taking you home. Your actual home. And Marco is posting guards." "For 2 weeks? Until sentencing?" "Adriano, that's excessive." "No, what's excessive is what Victor did to you. What's excessive is thinking he won't try something now that he's been publicly humiliated and is facing prison time." Adriano's voice was hard, uncompromising. "I'm not taking chances with your safety. Not now, not ever." The vehemence in his tone made something flutter in Elena's chest, some treacherous part of her heart that wanted to believe his protectiveness meant something beyond professional concern. But she'd spent 2 years misreading a man's intentions, convincing herself that control was love. She wouldn't make that mistake again. "Okay," she said quietly. "But just until sentencing. After that, I need to learn to live my life again without armed guards." They drove to her apartment in silence, Adriano's driver navigating traffic while Marco coordinated security protocols over the phone. Elena watched the city slide past her window and tried not to think about Victor out there somewhere, free, angry, dangerous. Her new apartment was in a better neighborhood than her old one, on the 8th floor of a building with actual security and a doorman who took his job seriously. Adriano had insisted on both when he'd helped her find the place, and now she was grateful for his paranoia. Marco met them in the lobby, a mountain of a man with kind eyes and the build of someone who'd done serious violence and would again if necessary. "Boss, Miss Cruz," he nodded to each of them. "I've got 2 men on the building entrance, 2 more on her floor. No one gets in without clearance." "Good." Adriano turned to Elena. "I need you to promise me something. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you call me immediately. Not 911, not building security. Me. Understand?" "Adriano, promise me, Elena." The intensity in his voice left no room for argument. "I promise." He studied her face for a moment longer as if memorizing it, then nodded. "I'll check in later, try to get some rest." But rest was impossible. Elena paced her apartment, her mind racing through everything that had happened in court, everything that could still go wrong. Victor was out there, free. And if she knew anything about him after 2 years, it was that he didn't forgive, and he sure as hell didn't forget. The sun set, painting her apartment in shades of orange and red. Elena made tea she didn't drink, started a book she couldn't focus on, tried to convince herself that the security was enough, that Victor wouldn't dare try anything with guards posted. She almost believed it. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. Elena's hand hovered over the screen, every instinct screaming not to answer. But some stubborn part of her, the part that had testified in court, that had faced him down and refused to be silent, needed to know. "Hello? You think you've won?" Victor's voice was slurred, thick with alcohol and rage. "You think putting me in front of a jury, letting them hear all your lies, destroying my reputation, you think that's the end of it?" Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "Victor, If you're calling to threaten me, I'm calling to remind you of something you seem to have forgotten. You're mine, Elena. You've always been mine. And what's mine doesn't get to just walk away because some rich bastard convinced you that you're special. I was never yours. I was a person you hurt and controlled and tried to destroy. There's a difference. His laugh was ugly. That difference? That's what your fancy lawyer convinced you of. But we both know the truth. Without me, you're nothing. You were nothing when I found you, and you'll be nothing after they lock me up. Vieri thinks he can save you, but he can't. No one can. Because the real damage? That's already done. It's inside you now, and it's never going away. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. You're wrong. The only thing inside me now is the certainty that I'm worth more than you ever believed, that I'm stronger than you ever wanted me to be, and that in 2 weeks you'll be in prison where you belong. 2 weeks, Victor repeated, his voice dropping to something darker. A lot can happen in 2 weeks, Elena. A lot can go wrong. Accidents happen, people disappear, and your guard dogs can't watch you every second of every day. The line went dead. Elena stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, her entire body shaking. Then training kicked in. 4 years of working for Adriano, of understanding how dangerous men operated, of knowing that threats weren't just words. She dialed Adriano's number with trembling fingers. He answered on the first ring. Elena, what's wrong? Victor just called me. Her voice cracked. Adriano, he knows where I live. He knows about the guards, and he threatened me. I'm on my way. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Marco. His voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded violence. And Elena, forward me that call. I'm going to make sure his bail gets revoked tonight. 20 minutes later, Adriano was at her door with Marco and 2 lawyers who'd apparently been on standby. They recorded Elena's statement, documented the call, and within an hour had filed an emergency motion with the court. By midnight, Victor was back in custody. He won't get bail again, Richard Chen assured her over the phone. Not after that call. Judge Torres doesn't take kindly to witness intimidation. Elena should have felt relief. Instead, she felt hollowed out, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She'd testified, faced him down, won, and he'd still found a way to make her afraid. I'm staying, Adriano announced after the lawyers left. What? I'm staying here tonight. Marco's got the perimeter covered, but I want to be here, inside. He held up a hand before she could protest. I'll take the couch. You won't even know I'm here. But I'm not leaving you alone, not after that call. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, that she didn't need him to protect her. But the truth was, she wasn't fine. And the idea of being alone in her apartment, jumping at every sound, imagining Victor somehow slipping past the guards, it was unbearable. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. She retreated to her bedroom, but sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Victor's voice, felt the phantom grip of his hands on her wrists, remembered the taste of blood from her split lip. The past 3 months of therapy, of building herself back up, of learning to feel safe again, one phone call had shattered all of it. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up and padded out to the living room. Adriano was still awake, sitting on her couch with his laptop open, working despite the hour. He looked up when she appeared, his expression immediately concerned. Can't sleep? Can't stop thinking. Elena settled into the armchair across from him, pulling a throw blanket around her shoulders. Every time I close my eyes, I hear his voice. I thought I was past this. I thought I was stronger. You are stronger. One setback doesn't erase 3 months of healing. It feels like it does. She pulled the blanket tighter. He said something that keeps echoing in my head, that the real damage is already done, that it's inside me now and it's never going away. What if he's right? What if I'm always going to be this broken version of myself? Adriano closed his laptop and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who survived 2 years of systematic abuse and still managed to keep showing up to work every day. Someone who built a case against her abuser with the same precision she brings to financial reports. Someone who stood up in court and told the truth, even though it meant reliving trauma. That's not broken, Elena. That's steel wrapped in silk. The words hit her harder than she expected, and suddenly she was crying. Not the broken sobs from that first night, but something quieter, more cathartic. Adriano moved to sit beside her, close but not touching, giving her space to fall apart without being alone. "I'm so tired of being afraid," she whispered through the tears. "I'm tired of checking over my shoulder, tired of flinching when someone moves too fast, tired of this weight in my chest that won't go away. I know, but it will get lighter, not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And until then, you don't have to carry it alone." Elena looked at him through blurred vision, this complicated man who'd inserted himself into her nightmare and refused to leave. "Why are you doing this? And I want the real answer this time, not deflection." Adriano was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded like confession. "Because somewhere over the past 4 years, you stopped being just my assistant and became someone I couldn't stop thinking about. Someone whose smile made my day better, whose presence in my office felt essential in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. And that night you called me, terrified and hurt. It clarified something I'd been trying to ignore. That I care about you, Elena. Not as an employee, not as a responsibility. As someone who matters to me in ways I'm still figuring out." The confession hung between them, heavy with implications and possibilities. Elena's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "That's complicated," she managed. "I know, which is why I haven't said anything before. You're vulnerable right now, recovering from trauma. The last thing you need is your boss developing feelings. So I've kept it professional, kept my distance, tried to be what you needed without crossing lines." He finally looked at her, his dark eyes intense. "But you asked for the truth, and I'm done lying to you, or to myself." Elena's mind was reeling, trying to process everything she'd just heard. Part of her wanted to throw herself into his arms, to let this fierce, protective man become the next chapter of her story. But another part, the part that had learned hard lessons about mistaking intensity for love, knew that she wasn't ready. That she needed time to figure out who she was outside of Victor's control before she could even think about being with someone else. "I care about you too," she said carefully. "But Adriano, I need to be honest. I don't trust my own judgment right now. I spent 2 years convincing myself that Victor loved me, that his control was protection, that his jealousy meant he cared. I can't afford to make that mistake again. I need to learn to stand on my own first, to figure out who Elena Cruz is when she's not defined by a man. Whether that's Victor trying to destroy her or you trying to save her." Something that looked like pain flickered across his face, but he nodded. "I understand, and for what it's worth, I don't want to save you. I've watched you save yourself over these past 3 months. What I want is to be there while you do it, to support you without controlling you, to—" He stopped, shook his head. "But you're right. You need space to heal, and I need to respect that." "I'm not saying never," Elena said softly. "I'm just saying not now. Not when I'm still figuring out how to sleep without nightmares, still learning how to trust my own instincts again." "Then I'll wait." The words were simple, absolute. "However long it takes." They sat together in the quiet darkness of her apartment, not touching but no longer maintaining careful distance either. And for the first time since that night 3 months ago, Elena felt something that wasn't fear or anger or exhaustion. She felt hope. 2 weeks later, Victor was sentenced to 8 years in prison with no possibility of parole. Elena didn't attend the sentencing. She'd said everything she needed to say in court, and she had no desire to see him one more time. Instead, she went to work, filed reports, organized Adriano's calendar, and slowly, carefully, started building a life that belonged only to her. But that night, when she returned to her apartment, she found something unexpected. Not a threat, not a reminder of Victor's violence. Just an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a handwritten note in Adriano's precise script. "You asked me once why I came when you called. The real answer is this. Because in 4 years of working together, you became the person I most wanted to talk to, the voice I listened for, the presence that made everything else make sense. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll still be here, however long it takes." A. Elena read it 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in her nightstand drawer. She wasn't ready yet. But someday, when she'd rebuilt herself from the ground up, when she trusted her own strength and judgment again, when she could choose a relationship from a place of wholeness instead of need. Someday, she would walk into Adriano's office and give him her answer. But that day wasn't today. Today, she was still learning how to be free. 6 months passed, like pages turning in a book Elena was finally writing for herself. The nightmares came less frequently. The instinct to check over her shoulder faded to occasional vigilance instead of constant terror. She'd found a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, joined a support group for survivors of domestic violence, and slowly, painfully, began to trust her own judgment again. Work became her anchor. The familiar rhythm of Adriano's schedule, the satisfaction of organizing chaos into order, the quiet competence she'd always possessed but had forgotten she owned. He kept his distance like he'd promised, professional and respectful, but sometimes she'd catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip, something between pride and longing that he'd quickly mask behind business as usual. They didn't talk about the note. They didn't talk about feelings or futures or the careful dance they were doing around each other. They just worked together with the easy rhythm of 4 years' practice. And if there was something more simmering beneath the surface, neither of them acknowledged it. Until the morning, Marco appeared at Elena's desk, his expression grim. "Miss Cruz, I need a moment." Elena looked up from the quarterly report she'd been reviewing, noting the tension in Marco's shoulders. In the months she'd known him, she'd never seen him rattled. Whatever this was, it wasn't good. "What's wrong?" "Victor Hale escaped custody during a prison transfer yesterday evening. We just got the notification." The words hit her like a physical blow. The pen slipped from her fingers, clattering against the desk. "What? How is that even possible?" "Details are still coming in, but it looks like he had help. Someone on the inside, maybe more than one. The authorities are conducting a manhunt, but so far..." Marco's expression darkened. "He's in the wind." Elena's hands started shaking. 6 months of healing, 6 months of learning to sleep without fear, 6 months of building a life, and with one sentence, it all came crashing down. "Does Adriano know?" "I just told him. He's in his office, wants to see you immediately." She stood on legs that felt disconnected from her body and walked the familiar path to Adriano's corner office. He was standing at the window, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand clenched into a fist against the glass. When he saw her, he ended the call abruptly. "Elena." Her name came out rough, almost broken. "Marco told me." She forced herself to sound calmer than she felt. "What happens now?" Adriano crossed the room in 3 strides and took her shoulders gently, his dark eyes searching her face. "Now you disappear. I have a safe house upstate, completely off the grid. You'll go there with Marco and a full security team until Victor is recaptured." "I can't just disappear. I have work, responsibilities, which matter exactly 0 compared to keeping you alive." His grip tightened fractionally. "Elena, listen to me. Victor escaped for one reason and one reason only: to come after you. He spent 6 months in prison thinking about nothing but revenge. This isn't about control anymore. This is about punishment." The cold certainty in his voice made her stomach twist. "You think he wants to kill me? I think he wants to hurt you worse than he did before, and I'm not giving him the chance." Adriano released her shoulders and moved to his desk, pulling out a file folder. "I've been preparing for this possibility since the day he was sentenced. Safe house, new identity if needed, extraction plan. I need you to trust me." Elena stared at him, this man who'd spent 6 months respecting her boundaries while simultaneously planning for her protection. "How long have you been working on this?" "Since the trial ended." He met her eyes without apology. "I know Victor's type. Prison doesn't reform men like him. It just gives them time to plan. So I made my own plans." "You really think hiding is the answer? Running away and hoping they catch him before he finds me?" "I think staying alive is the answer. Everything else is details we can figure out later." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she wouldn't let Victor steal another piece of her life, that she'd fought too hard to reclaim her freedom to just hand it over to fear again. But the truth was, she was terrified. The thought of Victor out there, hunting her, planning revenge, it made every hard-won piece of healing feel fragile as glass. "Okay," she whispered. "When do we leave?" "Now, pack a bag. Just essentials. Marco will take you to your apartment, then straight to the safe house. I'll handle everything else from here. She nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Elena. She looked back. This isn't going to be like before. You're not going to be trapped, waiting and hoping. I'm going to find him, and when I do, this ends, permanently. There was something in his tone that reminded her exactly who Adriano Vieri was, beneath the expensive suits and legitimate business, someone who'd built an empire in the shadows, someone who understood violence as a language. Part of her should have been frightened by that edge in his voice. Instead, she just felt protected. 2 hours later, Elena found herself in an SUV with tinted windows, Marco at the wheel, and 2 other guards following in a second vehicle. They drove north out of the city, leaving behind everything familiar until buildings gave way to trees and the sky opened up in a way it never did in the urban canyon she'd called home. The safe house turned out to be a sprawling cabin tucked into the mountains, accessible only by a private road with security checkpoints. It was beautiful in a rustic way, all exposed beams and stone fireplaces, windows that looked out on endless forest. Under different circumstances, it might have been a vacation. As it was, it felt like a very comfortable prison. Perimeter is secure, Marco announced after checking in with his team. Motion sensors, cameras, armed patrol. No one gets within a mile of this place without us knowing. How long do you think we'll be here? Elena asked, staring out at the trees. However long it takes. Marco's expression softened slightly. I know this isn't easy, Miss Cruz, but the boss is right. Staying hidden is the smartest play until Victor's recaptured. And if they don't recapture him? What then? Do I just stay hidden forever? Marco didn't answer, which was answer enough. The first 3 days crawled by with excruciating slowness. Elena tried to read, tried to work remotely on her laptop, tried to convince herself that this was temporary. But the isolation wore on her, made every hour feel like 3. The only bright spot was Adriano's nightly phone calls, ostensibly to check on security arrangements, but they always lasted longer than necessary, sliding into actual conversation. How are you holding up? He asked on the 3rd night. I'm going crazy, Elena admitted, curled up on the couch in front of the fireplace. I know I'm safe here. I know this is necessary, but I feel like I'm back where I started, hiding from Victor, letting him control my life. It's not the same. This time you're choosing safety, not being forced into isolation. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels pretty similar. Adriano was quiet for a moment. I wish I was there with you. The confession caught her off guard. Why? Because you shouldn't have to go through this alone. Because talking on the phone isn't the same as being there. Because... He paused, and she could almost see him choosing his words carefully. Because I miss you. Is that allowed? To miss someone who works for you? Elena's heart did something complicated in her chest. I think the normal employer-employee boundaries stopped applying to us a long time ago. Probably around the time you called me in the middle of the night, and I drove across the city to get you. Or maybe before that, Elena said quietly. Maybe around the time you started being the only person in my life who made me feel like I mattered. You matter, Elena, more than you know. They talked until nearly midnight, the conversation drifting from work to books to childhood memories to everything and nothing. When they finally hung up, Elena felt less alone than she had since arriving at the cabin. But on the 4th day, everything changed. Elena was making coffee in the kitchen when she heard shouting from outside. She froze, the mug slipping from her hands to shatter on the tile floor. Through the window, she could see Marco and the other guards converging on the tree line, weapons drawn. Her phone rang. Adriano. Stay inside, he said without preamble. Lock yourself in the panic room, now. What's happening? Motion sensors picked up movement in the woods. It's probably just an animal, but I'm not taking chances. Marco knows the protocols. Just get to the panic room and stay there until I give the all clear. Elena ran for the basement, her heart hammering against her ribs. The panic room was exactly what it sounded like. A reinforced steel door leading to a small fortified space with supplies, communications equipment, and enough security measures to withstand a siege. She sealed herself inside, the heavy door clicking shut with mechanical finality. Through the security monitors, she watched the guards fan out into the forest, searching. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Then one of the monitors flickered, and a guard's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got something, northeast quadrant. Looks like someone was here recently. Broken branches, disturbed ground." "Any sign of the intruder?" Marco's voice, tense but controlled. "Negative. Whoever it was is gone now." Elena's phone rang again. Adriano. "They found evidence someone was surveilling the property," he said without preamble. "Tracks leading away toward the main road. It could be Victor, could be someone he hired. Either way, that location is compromised. I'm pulling you out." "Pulling me out to where? Where else is there to go?" "To me." The words came out hard, definitive. "I'm coming to get you myself, and you're staying at my place where I can keep you safe personally." "Adriano, that's not negotiable. I let you out of my sight, and someone found you anyway. That's not happening again. Pack your things. I'll be there in 2 hours." He was there in 90 minutes, driving himself in a black sedan with Marco following in the SUV. Elena watched from the window as he emerged from the car, his suit jacket discarded, tie loosened, looking more dangerous than she'd ever seen him. He moved like a man on a mission, conferring briefly with Marco before heading inside. Their eyes met across the living room, and something shifted in the air between them. This wasn't her boss coming to check on his employee. This was something else entirely, something rawer, more intense. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine. Scared, but fine." "Good. Let's go." The drive back to the city was tense and silent. Adriano's hands tight on the steering wheel, his jaw set in a hard line. Elena watched him from the passenger seat, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly checked the mirrors. This was Adriano unfiltered, stripped of his usual control, and she was seeing the truth of him, protective to the point of obsession, dangerous when something he cared about was threatened. "You're angry," she observed quietly. "I'm furious. At Victor for escaping, at the system that let it happen, at myself for not anticipating that he'd find the safe house." His hands tightened on the wheel. "But mostly I'm angry that you're still living in fear because of him. That he gets to keep terrorizing you even from outside prison. It's unacceptable." "So what's the alternative? We can't exactly make him disappear." Adriano's expression went dark, and Elena realized with a start that he'd probably already considered exactly that option. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in days. They arrived at his penthouse after dark, Marco and 2 guards sweeping the space before allowing them entry. It was exactly as Elena remembered from those first 2 weeks after the assault. Luxurious without being ostentatious, comfortable in a way that money couldn't quite buy. "You'll take the master suite this time," Adriano said, carrying her bag down the hall. "It has the most advanced security setup, direct access to the panic room, reinforced walls." "I'll take the guest room." "Adriano, I can't kick you out of your own bedroom." "You're not kicking me anywhere. I'm choosing to put you in the safest room in the building." He set her bag down and turned to face her. "Elena, I need you to understand something. Victor getting this close to you, the idea that he might have succeeded if the guards hadn't been watching, it's eating me alive. So yes, you're getting the master suite, and yes, I'm going to be insufferable about security protocols, and no, I'm not apologizing for any of it." She stepped closer to him, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. "I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm just trying to figure out how we got here. 6 months ago, you were keeping your distance, respecting boundaries. Now you're offering me your bedroom and planning Victor's demise. What changed?" "What changed is that I almost lost you." The words came out rough, unguarded. "What changed is that I've spent 6 months watching you rebuild yourself, seeing you become stronger and more confident every day. And the thought of Victor destroying that, hurting you again, I can't allow it. I won't." "That sounds less like protection and more like..." "Like what?" he challenged, stepping closer until they were inches apart. "Like I care about you? Like I've been half in love with you for longer than I want to admit? Like the idea of anything happening to you makes me want to burn the whole world down?" Elena's breath caught. "Adriano, I know you need space, need time, need to figure yourself out without another man trying to control your life. I'm trying to respect that, Elena. I swear I am. But Victor being out there hunting you, it's making it very hard to maintain professional distance when every instinct I have is screaming at me to keep you close and safe." "Maybe professional distance is the wrong thing to maintain right now," Elena heard herself say. "Maybe what I need isn't space from you specifically. Maybe what I need is to know that choosing to be close to you is my choice, made from strength instead of fear. Something blazed in Adriano's eyes. And is it your choice? Elena thought about the past 6 months, the therapy sessions where she'd learned to recognize healthy relationships from toxic ones, the support group where she'd heard other survivors' stories and realized that real love didn't involve control or intimidation or making someone feel small, the quiet work of rebuilding her self-worth until she could trust her own judgment again. She thought about Adriano, the way he'd respected her boundaries even when it clearly cost him, the way he protected without possessing, the way he'd given her space to heal while making it clear he'd be there when she was ready, the way he saw her not as someone to save, but as someone capable of saving herself, even while he stood ready to help if she asked. Yes, she said quietly. It's my choice. I choose this. I choose you. For one suspended moment, Adriano just stared at her as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. Then his hand came up to cup her face with devastating gentleness, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You're sure? Because Elena, once we cross this line, I'm all in. I don't do anything halfway, and that includes this. Includes you. I'm sure. And she was. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was absolutely certain about something. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the rough possession Victor had used to claim ownership. This was different, careful and reverent, a question being asked and answered with every breath. Elena leaned into it, into him, letting herself feel safe and wanted and cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, Adriano rested his forehead against hers. We still need to deal with Victor. I know. The reminder of reality was sobering, but not devastating. What's the plan? The plan is that we stop hiding and start hunting. Adriano's expression hardened. I've got people working every angle, tracking his known associates, monitoring his old haunts, following money trails. He's going to make a mistake, and when he does, we'll be ready. And by we'll be ready, you mean... I mean we end this, legally if possible, with him back in custody facing additional charges. But if he comes for you again, if he tries to hurt you, Adriano's voice went cold, then I handle it my way. Elena should have been frightened by the implicit threat, by the reminder that Adriano operated in spaces the law didn't quite reach. Instead, she felt a fierce satisfaction that someone was finally treating Victor like the threat he was. What do you need from me? She asked. I need you to trust me, and I need you to be willing to do something that might seem crazy. How crazy? Adriano's expression turned calculating. Crazy enough that we use you as bait to draw him out. Elena's stomach dropped. You want to what? Think about it. Victor's obsessed with you, consumed by the need to punish you for putting him in prison. Right now he's in hiding, being careful, making it nearly impossible to track him. But if he thinks he has a chance to get to you, if he sees an opening, he'll take it, and we'll be ready. You want me to deliberately put myself in danger. I want you to help us end this so you can finally be free. Adriano took her hands, his grip warm and steady. You wouldn't be alone. Wouldn't be unprotected. I'd have teams positioned everywhere, watching every angle. But yes, it would require you to be visible, to give him a target. It's risky, and if you're not comfortable with it, we find another way. Elena's mind raced through the implications. Victor out there somewhere, planning his revenge. The alternative of hiding indefinitely, always looking over her shoulder, never quite safe. The past 6 months she'd spent learning to be strong, to trust herself, to refuse to be a victim. What exactly would I have to do? Over the next hour, Adriano laid out the plan with the precision of someone who'd orchestrated far more complex operations. Elena would resume a visible life, going to work, shopping, dining out, while maintaining routines that were predictable enough for Victor to track, but controlled enough for Adriano's teams to monitor. She'd be wearing a tracking device, surrounded by undercover guards, never actually alone, even when she appeared to be. The goal was to give Victor enough confidence to make a move while ensuring that when he did, they'd be ready to take him down. It's a trap, Elena said, understanding clicking into place. I'm the bait, and you're setting a trap. Yes, but only if you agree. I won't force this, Elena. If you say no, we go back to the safe house, beef up security, and wait for the authorities to do their job. which could take months, years even. Elena stood and walked to the windows, staring out at the glittering city below. Somewhere out there, Victor was planning his attack, believing he held all the power. The idea of flipping that script, of taking control and ending this on her terms, it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She turned back to Adriano. "I'll do it, but I have conditions." "Name them." "I want to know everything. No protecting me from details. No keeping me in the dark for my own good. If I'm going to be bait, I'm going to be bait with full information." "Agreed." "And if we catch him, I want to be there. I want to see it end." Adriano's expression turned fierce with approval. "Done. Anything else?" "Yeah." Elena crossed back to him, her decision crystallizing into absolute certainty. "I want to stop sleeping in separate rooms. I want to stop pretending this thing between us is something we can ignore or postpone. Because if I'm going to walk into danger, I want to know exactly what I'm fighting to get back to." The kiss he gave her this time was less gentle, more claiming, a promise and a declaration all at once. When they finally came up for air, Adriano pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with careful strength. "We're going to end this," he murmured against her hair, "and then we're going to build something real, something that's ours. No more fear, no more hiding, just us." "Just us?" Elena echoed, and for the first time since Victor had escaped, she felt something other than terror. She felt ready. The next morning, Elena walked into Vieri Imports like she'd done 1,000 times before, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her posture straight and confident. But this time she was acutely aware of the small tracking device tucked into her watch, the undercover guards positioned throughout the building, the security cameras that had been upgraded overnight. "Miss Cruz," the receptionist smiled warmly. "Good to have you back. Mr. Vieri said you'd been working remotely." "Just for a few days. Nothing serious." The lie came easily, practiced until it sounded natural. She settled into her desk and pulled up Adriano's calendar, falling into familiar routines while her mind remained hyper-aware of everything around her. Every person who walked past her desk got a second glance. Every unexpected sound made her pulse spike. It was exhausting and terrifying and somehow clarifying. This was it, the beginning of the end, one way or another. Adriano appeared in his office doorway mid-morning, all professional demeanor despite the fact that they'd spent the night tangled together in his bed, learning the geography of each other's bodies and hearts. "Miss Cruz, do you have those quarterly reports ready?" "On your desk, Mr. Vieri." The formality felt surreal after the intimacy of the night before, but maintaining appearances was part of the plan. "Excellent. Oh, and I'll need you to run an errand this afternoon. Document delivery to the warehouse district. Marco will drive you." Elena nodded, understanding the subtext. The warehouse district was controlled territory, easy to monitor and secure. If Victor was going to make a move, better it happened there than somewhere unpredictable. The day passed with agonizing slowness, every hour bringing them closer to the moment that would decide everything. When 3 o'clock came, Elena gathered the documents Adriano had prepared, actual business papers, because every detail had to be authentic, and met Marco in the parking garage. "You ready for this?" Marco asked as he held the car door open. "As ready as I'll ever be." Elena slid into the back seat, her heart hammering but her hands steady. They drove through the city in silence, Marco's eyes constantly checking mirrors while Elena watched the familiar street slide past. Somewhere behind them, she knew, was a second vehicle with additional guards. Somewhere ahead, more teams were already in position, waiting. The warehouse was exactly as Adriano had described it, a large industrial space in a district that mixed legitimate businesses with less legal operations, the kind of place where questions weren't asked and people minded their own business. Elena stepped out of the car, document case in hand, and walked toward the entrance with Marco a careful 3 steps behind. That's when she heard it, a sound that shouldn't be there, metal scraping against concrete. Marco's hand went to his weapon, but before he could draw, a figure emerged from behind a shipping container. Victor. He looked different than she remembered. Harder somehow, his face gaunt, and eyes wild with the kind of obsession that had been given 6 months in prison to ferment and grow toxic. He was holding something. Elena's breath caught as she recognized the knife, the same kitchen knife he'd grabbed during that final argument in her apartment. "Hello, Elena," he said, his voice eerily calm. Miss me? Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into something viscous and surreal. Elena's grip tightened on the document case, her training from the past few days clicking into place. Don't run, don't show fear, keep him talking until backup arrives. Victor. She was proud of how steady her voice came out. You shouldn't be here. Shouldn't be here? His laugh was sharp, broken. I shouldn't be a lot of places, Elena. I shouldn't be a convicted felon. I shouldn't have spent 6 months in a cell thinking about what you did to me. But here we are. Marco's hand was still moving toward his weapon, but Victor noticed. The knife came up, pointing directly at Elena. Tell your guard dog to stand down, or I swear I'll put this through your throat before he can draw. Marco, Elena said quietly. Don't. She could see the war playing out on Marco's face, the instinct to protect versus the reality of the knife less than 10 feet from her neck. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands. Smart man. Victor's attention swung back to Elena, his eyes roving over her face with an intensity that made her skin crawl. You look good. Better than you did when you were with me, actually. I guess whoring yourself out to a rich man agrees with you. The crude words were meant to wound, to make her feel small and ashamed. 6 months ago, they might have worked, but Elena had spent too much time in therapy, done too much work rebuilding her sense of self-worth to let Victor's poison take root again. Is that what you think this is about? She asked calmly. You think I left you for Adriano? I think you destroyed my life for him. I think you lied in court, twisted everything to make me look like a monster, all so you could play victim and run into his arms. I didn't have to twist anything, Victor. I just told the truth. About the bruises you left on my body, about the money you stole, about the signatures you forged. All of that happened. All of it was real. You made me do it. The shout echoed off the warehouse walls. You pushed me to it with your attitude, your disrespect, the way you looked at him like he was something special. You think I didn't notice? You think I couldn't see the way you'd light up when you talked about work? About Vieri? You were mine, Elena. Mine. And you threw that away. Elena felt a surge of something hot and fierce in her chest. Anger, yes, but also clarity. Standing here, facing the man who'd terrorized her, she could finally see him clearly, not as the powerful figure he'd seemed when she was trapped, but as something pathetic and small. A man so insecure in himself that he tried to destroy someone else to feel big. I was never yours, she said, and each word landed with the weight of absolute truth. I was a person you hurt and controlled because you couldn't stand the idea of me having any power of my own. But Victor, here's what you never understood. You didn't break me. You tried, but you failed. And every day since I left you, I've gotten stronger. While you were rotting in a cell, I was rebuilding my life, learning to trust myself again, finding out who I am when I'm not living in fear. Shut up. The knife hand trembled slightly. You don't get to talk to me like that. You don't get to act like you're better than me. I don't have to act. Elena took a small step forward, ignoring Marco's sharp intake of breath. I am better than you, Victor. Better because I choose not to hurt people. Better because I don't need to tear someone else down to feel powerful. Better because when I love someone, really love them, it makes both of us stronger, not just me. Something flickered across Victor's face. Confusion, maybe. Or the first crack in his certainty. You're talking about him, Vieri. You think he loves you? Men like that don't love, Elena. They own, they possess. He's just better at hiding it than I was. No. And Elena knew with bone-deep certainty that she was right. He's better at seeing me as an equal instead of his property. He protected me without controlling me. He gave me space to heal instead of demanding I give him credit for saving me. That's the difference, Victor. That's what real love looks like. Real love. But Victor's expression twisted into something ugly. I'll show you real love. I spent 6 months planning this, Elena. 6 months thinking about all the ways I could make you pay. And you know what I realized? The only way to really hurt you is to take away the thing you think you've gained. Your precious freedom. Your new life. Him. The implication sent ice down Elena's spine. Victor, listen to me. No, you listen. He moved closer, the knife gleaming in the warehouse's fluorescent light. I'm going to make sure you never feel safe again. I'm going to haunt every moment of your life until you're as broken as you made me. And then, when you're begging for it to end, when you understand exactly what you did to me, then I'll give you peace." "That's enough." Adriano's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He emerged from behind a stack of crates, flanked by two plainclothes police officers. His face was composed, almost calm, but Elena could see the fury burning beneath the surface, cold and controlled and absolutely lethal. Victor spun toward him, the knife still raised. "The man of the hour, tell me, Vieri, what's it like sleeping with my leftovers?" "Careful." The single word carried enough menace to make even Victor hesitate. "You're already looking at additional escape charges, assault, terroristic threats. Don't add assaulting an officer to the list." "Officers?" Victor glanced at the two men flanking Adriano, noting their badges for the first time. His face went pale, then flushed with rage. "This was a setup. You used her as bait." "I used her as bait with her full knowledge and consent," Adriano corrected, moving slowly closer. "Because unlike you, I actually respect her autonomy and her choices. She wanted to end this, wanted to stop living in fear of you. So yes, we set a trap. And you walked right into it." Elena watched Victor's expression cycle through emotions: rage, betrayal, disbelief, and finally something that looked almost like desperation. The knife in his hand lowered slightly, and for a moment she thought he might actually surrender. Then his eyes hardened, and she knew what was coming before he moved. "If I can't have you—" Victor lunged forward, the knife arcing toward Elena with vicious intent. Everything happened in fractured seconds. Marco moving to intercept, one of the officers drawing his weapon, Adriano shouting something Elena couldn't process over the roar of adrenaline in her ears. But Elena didn't freeze, didn't cower or scream or wait to be saved. 6 months of therapy, of self-defense classes Adriano had quietly arranged, of learning to trust her own strength, all of it coalesced into action. She dropped the document case, stepped inside Victor's reach instead of backing away, and brought her elbow up hard into his extended arm. The knife clattered to the concrete. Victor stumbled, off balance, and that's when Marco hit him from the side. They went down in a tangle of limbs, Marco's superior training and size quickly pinning Victor face down against the ground. "Elena!" Adriano was there, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes searching her face for injury. "Are you hurt? Did he—" "I'm fine." And miraculously, she was. Her hands were shaking, her heart hammering, but she was uninjured and whole, and suddenly, unexpectedly, laughing. "I'm fine. It's over. It's actually over." The police officers were already hauling Victor to his feet, securing his hands behind his back with practiced efficiency. He was shouting something, but Elena didn't bother listening. His words had lost their power to hurt her. He was just noise now, fading into irrelevance. "Miss Cruz." One of the officers approached, his expression professional but kind. "We'll need a statement from you, and there will be additional charges filed against Mr. Hale. Detective Morrison will be in touch to coordinate." Elena nodded, letting Adriano guide her toward his car while Marco handled the logistics with law enforcement. Her legs felt disconnected from her body, adrenaline giving way to the crash that always followed. By the time they reached the vehicle, she was shaking so hard, Adriano had to help her into the passenger seat. "Let it out," he said quietly, crouching beside her. "You don't have to be strong right now." And just like that, the tears came. Not broken sobs like that first night, but something cleaner. Relief, maybe. Or release. All the fear and tension she'd been carrying for months, pouring out in salt water and shuddering breaths while Adriano held her hand and waited. When she finally regained control, she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart stumble. Pride and concern, and something deeper. Something that looked like the kind of love that didn't demand or possess, but simply existed, steady and sure. "You didn't need saving," he said softly. "You handled him yourself before anyone could reach you." "I had a good teacher?" Elena managed a watery smile. "Several, actually. The therapist who taught me it's okay to be angry. The self-defense instructor who showed me how to use fear as fuel. And you teaching me that asking for help isn't weakness. You taught yourself the most important lesson, though, that you're stronger than you ever gave yourself credit for." They drove back to the penthouse in comfortable silence, the city lights blurring past as evening settled over the skyline. Elena felt hollowed out but clean, as if confronting Victor had finally purged some poison she'd been carrying. Detective Morrison called that evening with an update. Victor Hale has been charged with escape, assault with a deadly weapon, terroristic threats, and violation of a restraining order. Given his prior conviction and the circumstances of today's incident, bail has been denied. He's back in custody, maximum security this time. They're not taking any chances. How long? Elena asked. The DA is pushing for the maximum on all counts, which with the previous sentence means he's looking at a minimum of 15 years, likely more. You won't have to worry about him for a very long time, Miss Cruz. When she hung up, Adriano was standing by the window with 2 glasses of wine. He handed her one, his fingers brushing hers in a touch that was somehow more intimate than a kiss. 15 years minimum, Elena said. It's over. Really, truly over. How does it feel? She considered the question, taking a sip of wine while she processed the complex tangle of emotions. Strange. Like I should feel more relieved than I do, but mostly I just feel tired and ready to stop talking about Victor Hale and start thinking about what comes next. And what does come next? For you? Elena set down her wine glass and moved to stand beside him at the window. The city stretched out below them, millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of stories. Somewhere out there, her story had been about survival. But up here, in this moment, it could become about something more. I think what comes next is figuring out who I am when I'm not defined by trauma or recovery or fear, she said slowly. I want to travel. I've never been anywhere because Victor always found reasons why we couldn't. I want to go back to school, finish the degree I gave up on. I want to try things and fail at them and learn that failure isn't the end of the world. Those all sound like excellent goals. Adriano's voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the question beneath it. Elena turned to face him, reading the careful hope in his expression. And I want to do all of that while building something real with someone who sees me as a partner, not a project. Someone who challenges me to be better without making me feel small. Someone who understood that loving me meant giving me space to heal, even when that must have been impossibly hard. Elena, let me finish. She took his hands, feeling the calluses that proved this man who lived in expensive suits had once worked with those hands. I know this is complicated, you're still technically my boss, and there are 1,000 reasons why this could go wrong. But I also know that you're the person I want to call when something good happens. You're the one I want to be with when I'm scared and happy and bored and every moment in between. So yes, what comes next includes you. If you're willing to take a chance on someone who's still figuring things out. The kiss he gave her was answer enough, but he pulled back to speak anyway. I'm willing to take 1,000 chances on you, and for what it's worth, you won't be working for me anymore. Elena blinked. What? I've been thinking about this for a while now. You're overqualified to be an executive assistant, and we both know it. What you should be is a partner, not in the romantic sense, though yes, that too, but in business. You have an eye for detail and an understanding of operations that I'd be stupid not to leverage properly. Adriano's expression turned serious. I want to open a consulting division, helping other businesses streamline their operations, and I want you to run it. Your own department, your own team, answering only to the board. Separate enough that we're not in a direct reporting relationship, but close enough that we're still working together. You're offering me a promotion and a partnership in the same conversation? I'm offering you a future where you're not stuck choosing between your career and your personal life, where you can be with me without worrying about office politics or power dynamics or any of the complications that come from dating your boss. Elena's mind was spinning, trying to process everything he was offering. Independence and partnership, growth and stability, risk and safety all wrapped together. What if I fail? What if I can't handle running a whole division? Then we figure it out together. But Elena, I've watched you handle my schedule, my accounts, and my business operations for 4 years. I've seen you rebuild yourself from the ground up after trauma that would have broken most people. If there's anyone I trust to make this work, it's you. The faith in his voice was staggering. Not blind faith that ignored reality, but earned trust built on years of watching her work, seeing her strength, understanding her capabilities. This was what love looked like when it wasn't about possession. It was about seeing someone clearly and choosing to build something together from that foundation of clear sight. Yes, Elena said simply. Yes to all of it. The division, the partnership, the future. Yes. They sealed the agreement with a kiss that tasted like new beginnings, then spent the rest of the evening making plans. Not just for the consulting division, though they sketched out ideas for that too, but for the life they wanted to build. Travel destinations and career goals and the kind of small mundane details that meant permanence, where they'd spend holidays, whose apartment they'd keep, whether they wanted kids someday or just freedom and each other. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, this choice to build something real with someone. But Elena had learned over the past year that the scariest choices were often the most worthwhile. That growth happened in the spaces where safety met risk, where vulnerability met trust. 3 months later, Elena stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office, smaller than Adriano's but still impressive, with a view of the city and her name on the door in brass letters. The consulting division had launched with 3 major clients already signed, and her team of 5 was shaping up to be exactly the blend of skills and personalities she'd hoped for. Her phone buzzed. Adriano. Dinner at 8? I'm making reservations at that place you liked. Elena smiled and typed back. Perfect. I'll meet you there. Love you. The words still felt new enough to send a little thrill through her every time she wrote them. Not the desperate, needy love she'd mistaken for the real thing with Victor, but something steadier, something that made her feel more like herself instead of less. The office door opened, and her assistant, a sharp young woman named Maya, poked her head in. Your 4 o'clock is here. The Meridian account? Send them in. Elena straightened her blazer and moved to the conference table, pulling up files on her tablet. This was the life she'd built. Professional, independent, hers. The meeting went well, as most of them did these days. She'd discovered that the skills she'd honed organizing Adriano's chaos translated beautifully to helping other companies streamline their operations. By the time her clients left, impressed and ready to sign a 6-month contract, she felt the familiar satisfaction of work well done. At 7:30, she closed her laptop and headed out, exchanging goodnights with the security guard who'd replaced her need for armed protection. Victor was still in prison, would be for years, but more importantly, Elena had stopped looking over her shoulder, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. She'd learned to trust that safety wasn't a temporary condition, but something she could build and maintain. The restaurant was intimate and elegant, the kind of place where low lighting and soft music created pockets of privacy. Adriano was already there, standing when she approached, his eyes lighting up in that way that still made her breath catch. "How was your day?" he asked after they'd ordered, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Good. We landed the Meridian account, and I think we're close on the Thompson contract too. Maya's been incredible. I might steal her permanently from the temp agency." Elena paused, then smiled. "Actually, something else happened today. I got a call from the Women's Crisis Center downtown. They want me to speak at their fundraiser next month. Share my story, talk about recovery and rebuilding." She watched his expression carefully, wondering if he'd object to her being that public about what had happened. But Adriano just squeezed her hand and smiled. "Are you going to do it?" "I think so. If my story can help even one person realize they don't have to stay in a bad situation, that there's life after abuse, that seems worth the discomfort of talking about it publicly. You're going to be amazing." And there was no doubt in his voice. No concern that her pain would reflect badly on him. Just pride and support, the kind that lifted instead of weighed down. They talked through dinner about work and plans and the vacation to Greece they were planning for next month. Easy conversation between equals, the kind that came from truly knowing someone and being known in return. When the check came, they split it without discussion. A small gesture, but one that mattered to Elena. Not because she couldn't afford for him to pay, but because the choice itself represented something. Partnership. Equality. A relationship built on mutual respect, instead of one person always giving and the other always taking. As they left the restaurant, Adriano pulled her close, his arm around her waist. "I have something for you. Back at the apartment. Is it another security upgrade? Because I love you, but I think we've maxed out the paranoia factor." He laughed, that rare, genuine laugh she'd learned to draw out of him. Not security. Something else. Curiosity carried her through the drive home and up the elevator to the penthouse they now officially shared. Adriano led her to the living room where a large flat package wrapped in brown paper rested against the couch. "Open it," he said, suddenly looking almost nervous. Elena tore away the paper carefully, revealing a canvas underneath. When she saw what it depicted, tears pricked at her eyes. It was a painting, abstract but recognizable, of a woman standing at a window, her face turned toward light, her posture strong and free. The colors were bold, defiant, celebratory. "I commissioned it from that artist you mentioned liking," Adriano explained. "Asked her to paint resilience. This is what she came up with." "It's perfect." Elena's voice was thick with emotion. "It's me. Not the me I was, but the me I've become." "The me you always were," Adriano corrected gently. "You just had to find her again under all the damage Victor did." They hung the painting in the bedroom, where Elena could see it first thing every morning, a reminder of her own strength, her own journey. That night, as they lay tangled together in the dark, Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not just peace, though there was that, but completion. The sense that she'd finally arrived at the life she was always meant to have. "Adriano?" she whispered into the darkness. "Hmm? Thank you. For everything. For coming when I called that first night. For giving me space when I needed it. For seeing me as strong, even when I felt broken." He pulled her closer, his breath warm against her temple. "You don't need to thank me for loving you, Elena. That's just what I do. Who I am. You made it easy to see your strength because you never actually lost it. It was just buried for a while. Still, I needed someone to believe in me while I remembered how to believe in myself. You were that person." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, safe and chosen, and free. 6 months after that, Elena stood backstage at the Women's Crisis Center fundraiser, her heart hammering but her hands steady. She'd written and rewritten her speech a dozen times, trying to find the balance between honesty and hope, between acknowledging the pain and celebrating the survival. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage with her head high. The audience was a sea of faces. Survivors and supporters, donors and advocates, people who understood that domestic violence wasn't some distant tragedy, but a reality that touched countless lives. "My name is Elena Cruz," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "And 2 years ago, I was a woman who'd forgotten she had the right to say no." She told her story then, not all of it, not the details that would turn pain into spectacle, but the arc of it. The slow erosion of self that came from living with someone who saw love as ownership. The night everything broke, the long road back to herself. And finally, the choice to stop being defined by what had happened to her and start being defined by what she'd done with it. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you that recovery is easy," Elena said, nearing the end of her speech. "Some days are still hard. Some days I still have to remind myself that I'm safe, that I'm strong, that I deserve to take up space in this world. But I will tell you this. Whatever you're surviving right now, whatever situation you're trying to escape or heal from, you are so much stronger than you know. And you don't have to do it alone. There are people ready to help. There are resources available. There is life after abuse, and it can be beautiful and full and yours." The applause when she finished was thunderous, but what mattered more were the faces in the audience, the tears, the recognition, the hope. After the event, 3 different women approached her to share their own stories, to ask for advice, to simply say thank you for speaking truth about something most people wanted to ignore. Adriano was waiting for her by the door, pride written all over his face. "You were incredible." "I was terrified. But terrified and incredible aren't mutually exclusive." He handed her a glass of champagne from the reception table. "To Elena Cruz, survivor, fighter, and the strongest person I know." She clinked her glass against his. "To us, to second chances, to choosing love that makes us better instead of smaller." "To us," he echoed. They left the fundraiser together, walking out into a cool evening that smelled like rain and possibility. Elena had learned over the past 2 years that happy endings weren't really endings at all. They were just the beginning of the next chapter, the place where the real work of building a life began. And this life she was building, with Adriano beside her but not defining her, with work that fulfilled her, with freedom hard-won and carefully protected, this was better than any fairy tale. Because it was real, and it was hers, and she'd earned every piece of it. As they drove through the city toward home, Elena caught her reflection in the window. She looked different than she had 2 years ago. Stronger, yes, but also more open, more alive, more fully herself than she'd ever been. The woman looking back at her was someone who'd survived hell and come out the other side not just intact but transformed. Victor's voice no longer echoed in her mind with its poison and control. Instead, she heard her own voice, clear and sure, reminding her daily of the truths she'd learned the hard way. That love shouldn't hurt, that asking for help wasn't weakness, that she was worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth choosing every single day. "What are you thinking about?" Adriano asked, glancing over at her with that look that said he already knew but wanted to hear her say it. "I'm thinking about how far I've come, how I almost let fear keep me trapped, and how grateful I am that I found the courage to make that phone call. The best call you ever made." He reached over to take her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Though I might be biased, definitely biased." Elena squeezed his hand, feeling the solid warmth of his palm against hers. But not wrong. When they arrived home, Elena stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the space they'd created together. It wasn't the penthouse where she'd first found safety. They'd moved 6 months ago to a place that belonged to both of them equally, chosen together, decorated together, filled with pieces of both their lives. This was a home built on partnership and choice, not rescue and gratitude. The painting Adriano had commissioned hung in the living room now, visible from the entrance. Every time Elena saw it, she was reminded of her own resilience, her own capacity for transformation. She was the woman in that painting, no longer standing at the window looking out at a life she couldn't have, but standing in the center of the life she'd built, strong and free and unafraid. "Elena?" Adriano's voice came from the bedroom. "Come here. I want to show you something." She found him standing by the window, their window now, holding a small velvet box. Her heart stopped, then started again in double time. "I know we've talked about this," he said, his usual confidence wavering slightly, "about futures and partnership and building something permanent. But I wanted to make it official. Not because I need a piece of paper to prove anything, but because I want the world to know that you chose me just as much as I chose you." He opened the box, revealing a ring that took her breath away. Simple platinum band, single diamond, elegant without being ostentatious. Exactly what she would have chosen for herself. "Elena Cruz, will you marry me? Not because I saved you, we both know you saved yourself. Not because you work for me, you don't, not really, not anymore. But because in the past 2 years you've become my best friend, my partner, the person I want to face everything with. Because choosing you every day has been the best decision I've ever made, and I want to keep making that choice for the rest of my life." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but they were the good kind, the kind that came from overwhelming happiness instead of pain. "Yes, yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Like everything between them, it just worked. They kissed then, deep and slow, a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility and permanence. When they finally broke apart, Adriano rested his forehead against hers. "I love you. Not for what you survived, but for who you are. Every stubborn, brilliant, beautiful piece of you." "I love you too," Elena whispered. "Thank you for waiting, for giving me time to find myself before I gave myself to someone else. For understanding that I needed to choose this from strength, not need." "Always worth waiting for," he murmured. "You were always worth waiting for." They stood together at the window, watching the city lights flicker in the darkness, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage and built something beautiful from the ruins. Elena looked at the ring on her finger, catching the light, and felt a surge of gratitude so profound it almost hurt. Not gratitude for being saved, she'd saved herself, had done the hard work of healing and rebuilding and learning to trust again. But gratitude for finding a love that supported instead of smothered, that challenged instead of controlled, that made her feel more like herself instead of less. This was her happy ending, not because a man had rescued her, but because she'd rescued herself and then chosen to share her life with someone who deserved her. Not because she'd escaped danger, but because she'd learned to recognize the difference between real love and toxic possession. And it was just the beginning. There would be a wedding to plan, a business to grow, travels to take, challenges to face. There would be hard days and easy ones, arguments and reconciliations, all the messy, beautiful reality of building a life with another person. But Elena was ready for it, ready to stop surviving and start truly living, ready to stop running from fear and start running toward joy, ready to be not just a survivor, but a woman who'd taken her trauma and transformed it into strength, her pain into purpose, her fear into fierce determination never to let anyone make her feel small again. She'd walk through fire and come out forged into something stronger than she'd ever been before. And now, standing beside the man who'd understood that loving her meant giving her space to become that stronger version of herself, she was finally, completely, gloriously free. "Ready for the rest of our lives?" Adriano asked softly. Elena turned from the window to face him fully, seeing in his eyes the same certainty she felt in her bones. "I've never been more ready for anything." And she meant it. Every word, every promise, every choice. Because this time, she wasn't choosing from fear or desperation or the belief that she didn't deserve better. She was choosing from wholeness, from strength, from the absolute conviction that she was worthy of a love that built her up instead of tearing her down. Victor Hale was in prison, where he'd remained for years. But more importantly, he was no longer in her head, no longer had power over her thoughts or her choices or her sense of self. She'd taken all the damage he'd done and refused to let it define her. She'd survived him, and then she'd thrived beyond him, building a life so full and rich and beautiful that his attempts to destroy her seemed almost laughable in retrospect. This was her victory. Not just surviving, but flourishing. Not just escaping, but transforming. Not just healing, but becoming someone even stronger than the woman she'd been before Victor had tried to break her. And as she stood there with Adriano's arms around her and the promise of forever sparkling on her finger, Elena Cruz knew with absolute certainty that she'd never be afraid again. Not like that. Not of love, or men, or the future. She'd learned the hardest lesson anyone could learn, that the only person who could truly save her was herself. And having learned it, having lived it, having become the woman who'd done exactly that, she was unstoppable. The rest of her story was still unwritten, full of blank pages waiting to be filled with adventures and challenges, and all the messy beauty of a life fully lived. But whatever came next, she'd face it standing tall, clear-eyed, and absolutely certain of her own strength. Because Elena Cruz wasn't surviving anymore. She was living, thriving, free. And nothing, no one, would ever take that away from her again.